At the very heart of the Buddha's teaching is the experience of freedom. And freedom means being free of those habits of mind that cause suffering. Free from the habits of mind that cause suffering either to ourselves or causing suffering to others. So we do the practice in order to free the mind from the forces which cause this suffering, the forces of greed and attachment. Freeing the mind from the force, from the grip of fear or hatred. Freeing the mind from the dreamlike state of ignorance, of delusion. So all of the practices we do, whether it's concentration, or mindfulness, or loving kindness, or the practices of generosity, of ethical behavior, all of the practices serve this end. It's what the Buddha called the sure heart's release. It's release from suffering from ourselves and for others. So a unique aspect of the Buddha's teachings is that it both begins and ends with wisdom. The first step on the Noble Eightfold Path is right understanding, is right view. It's a wisdom factor of mind. And that's also the end of the path, when we really actualize that wisdom. There's nothing in the teachings which we have to believe as dogma. There's nothing that requires belief. All the teachings are a suggestion, are an offering, an encouragement for us to look and see for ourselves what is true. So it's really important, as you hear the teaching throughout this retreat and at other times, it's not about belief. It doesn't really matter whether you believe it or don't believe it. It's all to inspire us to take a look at our own hearts and our own minds, to see for ourselves the causes of suffering and the possibilities of freedom. So the question then is, given that wisdom is both the beginning and the end of the path, the question for us is, how can I train in wisdom? It's not something that we either have or don't have. It's a training. We can develop it. And when we put the teachings into practice, then over time, and it's perhaps more time than a week retreat, but as we put the teachings into practice and over time, we can see for ourselves, are these teachings, are these practices leading me to greater happiness or peace, or not? And if they're not, then I suggest you find a way that does. So it always comes back to our own experience, our own investigation. So tonight I want to emphasize one aspect of the training in wisdom, which is really the doorway to all the rest. And that is the wisdom that arises from an increasingly clear and deep experience of impermanence. This afternoon I mentioned Suzuki Roshi, famous Zen master who brought Zen, started the San Francisco Zen Center in the States. A student came to him and said, "I've been listening to your lectures for years, but I just don't understand. Could you please put it in a nutshell? Can you reduce Buddhism to one phrase?" Here it is. So this is what Suzuki said. Everything changes. All of Buddhism in a nutshell, in one phrase. Everything changes. The implications of this statement and of this truth are enormous. If we really knew really deeply understood this, it would transform our entire lives. What's so interesting about this is that it is not a hidden or an esoteric truth. We all know, at least on a conceptual level, on an intellectual level, we all know that everything changes. So it's not like it's some big mystery. But somehow we have to bring it from an intellectual, conceptual understanding to a direct, immediate, intimate perception of it. We have to be seeing the truth of change, because that's where the transformation happens. When we can see it deeply, and our whole practice is about this, when we can really be perceiving the truth of change deeply, our heart and mind relax. We let go of all kinds of struggle because we're no longer holding on so tightly. We can see this so clearly with respect to our changing bodies. Do any of you have bodies that haven't changed? I don't think so. And yet, if we're attached to them staying a certain way, or looking a certain way, the more attached we are to that, obviously, the more we're going to suffer when it doesn't. So it's so clear and it's so obvious. We have to understand that it's in the nature of our bodies to change, and sometimes it changes dramatically, either perhaps through illness or through an accident. Sometimes it's just the gradual process of aging. But it's always happening, and it is a part of nature. It's quite different and often difficult to understand that these changes, even when they're sudden or dramatic, are not a mistake. It's not that we've done something wrong. It is just in the nature of the body to change. It is not stable, it is not permanent. This is the Dharma, this is the law. And again, we know this conceptually. But have we really accepted it? Have we really let it in? Understanding it, this is just nature at work. There's a powerful Buddhist reflection on this, which comes right out of the discourses, and it's increasingly, I use it in my practice and in my life. It's the reflection on the changing nature of the body. And the Buddha said to reflect in this way: I am subject to old age and subject to aging. I am not exempt from aging. I am subject to illness. I am not exempt from illness. I am subject to death. I am not exempt from death. That when we're healthy, or when we're young, we just think it's going to stay that way. Or that it should stay that way. And that's why I like the phrase, the little tagline at the end, and I am not exempt. What's so amazing about the seductive power of the world is that when we look back at all our past experience, we see so clearly its dreamlike, impermanent, ephemeral nature. Now think back to things that happened a year ago. I mean, it's a bit of a memory now, or a month ago, or a day ago, or this morning. You know, everything that's happened, We experience it perhaps vividly in the moment, and then it's gone. So we know this. This is not something that's mysterious. We know this about experience from our own experience of it. And yet, when we look ahead, we get seduced by the excitement or fascination with the next hit of experience. As if somehow the next thing we do will bring us complete happiness and fulfillment. Even though everything that has happened until this point has not done that. So it's so odd that we know it and we don't know it. We know it when we look back, and we don't know it when we look ahead. Because how much of our lives are spent in anticipation, of the next pleasurable thing, or even not pleasurable, just some future event. For most of us, we're just living our lives leaning forward in anticipation of the next hit of experience, the next day of work, the next project, the next vacation, the next relationship, the next meal. We can even be leaning forward in our meditation in anticipation of the next breath. It's like, it's always leaning forward, looking for the next thing to bring about some kind of completion, and yet it never does. Why? Because everything is always changing. Nothing brings lasting fulfillment precisely because nothing lasts. So we have to pay attention to this which we already know. We know it, but somehow we just pretend that it's not true. So the great paradox of the spiritual life is that as objects of wanting, as objects of desire, all of these changing experiences leave us unfulfilled. Right? As objects of wanting, as objects of desire, they do not fulfill us. Finally, completely, because they're changing. Yet, as objects of mindfulness, the very same experiences, not as objects of desire, but as objects of mindfulness, are actually the doorway to liberation. So in understanding the impermanence of things, it does not suggest that we pull away, that we disengage. Rather, it suggests that we not hold on. And these are two different things. Liberating insight into impermanence can happen on many, many levels, because it's a truth on all levels of experience. So just a couple of examples. One of the examples our teacher used. From a distance, if you look at a line of ants, it looks like a solid line. But when you look closer, you see that it's not solid at all. There may be thousands or tens of thousands, of the individual ants, which are separated. It comes from close attention. When you listen to the bell, how many different modulations and changes. Normally, what do you hear? You hear the bell. You hear the sound of a bell as if the sound is one thing. It's not one thing. Even within this simple experience, if we were really listening carefully, we see the change on such fine levels. The same with the breath. or the movement of a step, a breath. An in-breath is not one thing. There are hundreds, maybe more, within one in-breath. Just changing small microscopic sensations. The out-breath in a movement, just in doing this. There is so much going on. And when we're paying that close attention, it gets really interesting. And if we're not paying attention, we go, oh, to spend half an hour doing this. Boring. But when you are, and this is why in the walking meditation, when we're really feeling the details of sensation in the movement, you can be experiencing the flow of change, the energetic sensations, so finely. This is not to suggest that we do not engage with our lives, with the conventional reality of our lives, because we do. We're living in this conventional, somewhat stable world, bodies and relating to each other. And all of that is fine. And we need to do that. We need to engage fully in our lives. But if we have the meditative insight that underneath it all, or within it all, it's really just a process of changing elements of mind and body, then we can engage in the world without attachment, without grasping, without clinging. And therefore, with much less suffering. Wisdom also comes from seeing impermanence in ways that we already know, but often overlook. And I think this is really important because all of our lives, every aspect of our lives, can teach us about impermanence. It's not just on meditation retreat. But because it's so common, we mostly have stopped paying attention. So we see change, we see it all around us. We see the change in nature, just the change of seasons throughout the year, the change of the weather in the course of the day, the huge changes that are taking place in the environment. There's the change of seeing the rise and fall of whole civilizations. I love reading history because when you read history, you see the compelling nature of what happened at a particular time, and then it's completely gone. There's one story from the Buddhist time of a nun who got enlightened, fully enlightened. She was just watching a little stream of water trickle down and be absorbed by the earth. And just by watching that, the changing nature, her mind opened. So lots of possibilities. The more clearly we see the change, and this is what I said at the beginning, it's not about knowing it intellectually, it's about being in the direct perception of it. When we're actually seeing it change, it's in those moments that the mind is not clinging. The mind actually lets go of clinging, and the less we cling, the less we suffer. Ajahn Chah, the great Thai master, he just expressed it so well. He said, if you let go, don't cling, a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. Your struggles with the world will have come to an end. So as Uffe mentioned, our teacher Munindra, he would often say, it's very simple, but it's not easy. We have to be seeing, and this is our practice. don't underestimate the transformative power of seeing impermanence on all of these levels. These are just commonplace experiences of our lives. Don't underestimate the importance of it, because they can really be a force for liberation. One of the very great monks of Burma from the beginning of the 1900s, his name was Ledi Sayadaw. He was a great meditation master and also scholar, a lot of writing. He said, not seeing things arising and passing away, not seeing that is ignorance, while seeing all phenomena as impermanent is the doorway to all the stages of insight and awakening. That's very straightforward. Not seeing the changing nature is ignorance, and seeing the impermanent nature of all phenomena is the doorway to liberation. So it's really clear what we have to do. And it's not hard to do if we're paying attention, because the truth of change is obvious on every level. So careful observation of some other obvious truths of change, some in particular, can really jolt us out of complacency, can really wake us up. And perhaps the most obvious and ignored reflection is that the end of birth is death. Our lives are only getting shorter and shorter. We are all in the queue of death, and we're marching up the queue. What's so interesting is, in contemplating death, for most of us, it's always other people who are dying. And we somehow don't make the connection. You know, we think we're not in the queue. There's a famous line from the Mahabharata, which is a great Indian epic. There was one of the sages in the book. He commented that one of the most remarkable things in the world is that we see people dying all around us, and yet we think it won't happen to us. So it's really to take a look, you know, because, again, if I asked any one of you, you know, you're going to die, of course, yes. But just take a look, examine whether that understanding has really landed within you. You know, whether we really know it from the inside. It's a powerful reflection. You know, it changes how we view our lives. What's so surprising, given that the truth of change is all around us, is that we still find change surprising. You know, we just have the idea, we're living our lives with the assumption that basically things are going to stay more or less the way they are, or if they're going to change, they're going to change to our liking. Use the reflection, I am not exempt. I am not exempt from illness, from old age, from things happening, things that we don't like happening. It's just all part of what our life is about. You know, sometimes I think people may have the idea that these reflections on death and impermanence kind of are morbid and depressing and we shouldn't. It's just the opposite. You know, when we take in the truth of it, it's enlivening. It's like it makes us alive to life because we understand the truth of how it's happening. So one little experiment you might make, it's a kind of reflection. It's one that I've just found very helpful for myself. To imagine ourselves on our deathbed. And we're giving ourselves a little bit of, we can give ourselves a little bit of comfort here, because we can imagine we're in bed. Now, we really don't know how we're going to die, but let's just say we're on our deathbed. Okay, so in those dying moments, just imagine oneself, to reflect on what would we have wanted to accomplish in our lives. You know, from that perspective, what would be most important for us to have done? So that's a powerful question. You know, because from the perspective, okay, you know, in the next few minutes we're going to be dying and die. Looking back, what's really important? And so obviously what's important is to be asking the question now. Because if we wait to our dying moments, it's too late. There's not time to make wise choices or to make changes. And so we can use this reflection on death to really inspire us in our lives to take a look. Okay, well, what is really important? What will I have wanted to have done in my life? The liberating power of the truth of impermanence was expressed very clearly by the Buddha. He said, it's better to live a single day seeing the rapid rising and passing of phenomena. It's better to live a single day seeing the momentariness of phenomena than to live 100 years without seeing it. I find that pretty startling. You know, what does this say about everything that we value in our lives? The Buddha is saying, seeing this, seeing the truth of impermanence on that refined level, better to see it for a single day than 100 years doing whatever else we do and not seeing it. Because the seeing of impermanence on this level is the doorway to liberation. When we really know it, when we see it, when we understand it, it transforms our understanding. It's very powerful. There are many places in the Buddhist discourses where people get enlightened hearing just one sentence. So get ready. This is your chance. It's so simple and so profound. And as I said, many stories of people hear this. So he said, whatever has the nature to arise will also pass away. So, whatever has the nature to arise, which is everything. Everything, in our mind, in our body, in the world, whatever has the nature to arise, which is everything, will also pass away. Do you at least see the potential for hearing that and letting go of attachment, of letting go of clinging? I mean, we still all have work to do, but even just to see the potential of really understanding this. Through our direct and intimate and close perceiving experience of impermanence, seeing it, reflecting on it, that all experience, every aspect of our minds, our hearts, our bodies, of the world, everything is an endlessly passing show. It's like the current, the flow of a river, or water over a waterfall. It just is continually flowing and changing. Seeing this so clearly as being the very nature of our lives. Our life is this process of change. Seeing it clearly and repeatedly reorients us towards care and loving kindness rather than attachment. So it's powerful. It reorients the way we are in the world. It reorients us towards letting go rather than clinging. Seeing this flow of impermanence again and again and again in every aspect, in meditation, outside of meditation, just being with this flow of change reorients us towards the possibility of freedom. So I'd just like to close with it's a teaching from a Zen abbess. She was the abbess of a monastery. Her name was Teijitsu. So this was a Zen Buddhist nunnery. And it describes her moment of awakening, her moment of enlightenment. She saw that all phenomena arose, abided, and fell away. She saw that knowing this arose, abided, and fell away. So even the knowing is part of this flow of impermanence. Then she knew there was nothing more than this. No ground, nothing to lean on. Nothing to lean upon at all, and no one leaning. And she opened the clenched fist in her mind. Great expression. She opened the clenched fist in her mind and let go and fell into the midst of everything. Isn't that beautiful? And she let go. She saw that it's all this passing show. Let go. She opened the clenched fist of her mind and fell into the midst of everything. So that's our practice. We're practicing letting go of that clenched fist. Let's just sit for a few moments.
So we have been developing concentration, partly on the breathing, focusing on breathing, partly on the meditation on loving kindness. Both samatha meditations that basically serve the purpose of developing our concentration, because the object is predefined and selected. In the one case, it's the breathing, which is the primary object. And every time the attention is diverted, we pull it back to the primary object. And the same goes for the metta meditation. It mainly serves the purpose to develop our concentration, and concentration is the proximate cause of developing insight, understanding into the nature of the mind, into the nature of thought, in the nature of feeling, in the nature of sound, in the nature of any object for the mind, and in the nature of attention itself, of mindfulness itself. So in the development of this kind of awareness, which is the domain of vipassana meditation, we develop the perception of the rise and fall of every phenomenon that attracts our attention. This meditation is actually about entering the stream of consciousness with awareness, entering the stream of phenomena with awareness. And in order to develop this insight, nothing should be excluded from our awareness. Whatever arises, whatever attracts our attention, we direct the full awareness on that object in order to see its phase of rising, and if we're capable of it, seeing its change, and if we're capable of it, seeing its fall. In the beginning, we usually only see the interval of the phenomenon's rising phase is most predominant. And usually we are not aware of, for instance, that a thought has ceased before another thought has taken its place. And usually in our life we are not so aware of the changing of our experience before afterwards, before in the retrospection. If we don't actually see how it is changing, well, there are various ways we relate to it, which may not be very realistic. We may try to hold on to the pleasurable object, or we may try to condemn the displeasurable object, because we actually don't see that whether the object is pleasurable or displeasurable, it is passing away. It's passing just like the clouds across the sky. But sometimes we get sucked in by a cloud, a thought, and then, metaphorically speaking, it is as if we perceive that one cloud as a whole sky, which is very delusive. The realistic way to perceive the clouds is that they are passing across the sky, and the sky in this metaphor is our awareness. If we are not aware of our awareness, we tend to be sucked in by the cloud. Either because we're trying to hold on to it, or the negative side of that is actually trying to push it away. But it's just another way of becoming entangled with the cloud and perceiving the cloud as the whole sky. It's very delusive. Of course, we are aware. But if we are not aware of our awareness, we don't see the sky. We don't see the clouds pass across the sky. And maybe you remember one definition, among others, of mindfulness is our awareness of our awareness. Then we are mindful. Then we are very aware. And then we can relate to our awareness, instead of just being sucked in by the reactivity of our awareness continually. And in the context of the application of mindfulness as a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, we are interested in focusing on reality as it is. And basically what is common to all phenomena is they are changing, they are rising, they're changing, they're becoming otherwise, and then they cease. They're momentary. So we try now to enter the stream, the Dharma Sota, the stream of the universal law. Another transcription of Dharma here is the teaching of the Buddha, the stream of the teaching of the Buddha. So now we switch from a state of attention that is primarily developing one-pointedness to a state of attention that is very flexible, where we apply this ideally very one-pointed mindfulness we have achieved by now to focus in on whatever arises as our experience, whether it be a sound, whether it be a thought about the sound, whether it be the feeling that the thought about the sound evokes. Whatever we become aware of, we try to focus in on the rising phase, primarily on the rising phase of that phenomenon. In the perception of sound, it's pretty easy to perceive the momentariness. It's pretty easy also to perceive change in taste, for instance. It is a little more difficult to perceive momentariness in our thoughts and in our feelings. But this is what we aim at now when we start practicing Vipassana, to focus in on the interval of the rising phase of a thought. And if that evokes a feeling, we focus in on where and how in the body we feel that, we perceive that feeling. We try to focus in on the rising phase. This is like the door into the stream of phenomena. Then, after a while, the ceasing phase will become clear as well. But the advantage of being with the rising phase of phenomenon all the time is that this side of our mind, which is continually engaged in sorting our experience, trying to hold on to pleasure and trying to push away displeasure, is sort of being uncoupled, you know. If you catch the rising phase of phenomenon, you're sort of standing a little outside and just observing. You're in the observing stance. And then the changing phase, the phase of changing into becoming otherwise, and the ceasing phase become clear gradually. But in the beginning, the rising phase is what we aim at. We have to sort of make an effort to sharpen our attention continually. So there's a sound, then we try immediately to focus in on the rising phase of the sound. And then when the sound has ceased, we go back to, there's nothing else, we go back to the breathing. So in a sense, the breathing has some sort of priority in Vipassana. But the difference between breathing meditation just as a samatha practice is that as you practice so far, whenever another object attracts your attention, you pull your attention back. You don't do this now. When another object attracts your attention, you direct your full attention on that object. And ideally, from the very moment, so you can be with the rising phase. And of course, in the beginning, you'll miss a lot. And you just have to accept that you're in a learning process, and gradually, as your mind becomes more flexible, more concentrated, you will be able to catch the rising phase of each phenomenon. Now you decide yourself actually to what degree you want to be with the breathing, and to what degree you want to switch over to choiceless awareness on whatever comes along. Because if you're not very concentrated, you may not be that so early in the morning. You just go on meditating on your breath. You know, it's a very effective way to develop this one-pointedness of mind. And then when you sort of feel you are concentrated, you switch over to choiceless awareness. And then if that doesn't work for you after 10, 20 minutes, or go back to breathing and develop some more one-pointedness, some more calm. Maybe that's what you need. So you have to administrate this transition from samatha to vipassana yourself. The more you become aware of momentariness, the more you will understand the other insights, the insight into potential suffering, dukkha, potential or actualized suffering, dukkha, and the insight into anatta, no self, what I call no core self, and the insight into the conditionality of all phenomena, the insight into the dependent origination. And when we develop these insights, we don't hold on to the clouds. We let them pass, because that's what they do. Our whole life is like looking up in the sky and seeing the clouds pass by. It's not because there's anything wrong with pleasure. Enjoy pleasure, but don't hold on to it. And accept this pleasure, don't condemn it, because it's passing, no point in trying to condemning it. It's just another way of being sucked in by the cloud and perceiving the cloud completely delusively as the sky. Be aware of the sky, the clouds passing across the sky. Be aware of your awareness. And all this is something we see intuitively. There are two kinds of knowledge. There are two ways of realizing something. There's conceptual realization, conceptual knowledge, which is usually based not on knowledge from our private experience. It could be, but not necessarily. Very often it's not. And then there's experiential knowledge, intuitively seeing into something and understanding it. And it's this seeing into something that has a liberating consequence on our mind. Conceptually, discursively, intellectually, we understand, most people understand to one degree or another that things are impermanent, but it's not the same as seeing the impermanence of things while they're changing. Seeing that changes our relationship to our experience. And that's really where the Buddhist teachings start. As long as there's consciousness, there's an object. And if you're not aware of your object, you should find it, you should make an effort to find it and see its rise and fall phase. Is there any questions? So, well, let's just do 30 minutes. Now we spent 20 minutes on the instructions.